Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah, and today I'm going to talk to you about learning behavioral strategies to support caregivers of children with autism. Just a little bit about myself. I have sorry about that, just starting my video. I have over 6 years experience working with children with autism and with other developmental disabilities. And I have a background in psychology. I worked as a psychologist in a special school in Singapore previously. And it's been a year since I've joined ARN, and I'm still learning a lot about behavior analysis, ABA, verbal behavior. That's a little bit about me, but then let's go ahead. And today, mainly, I'm going to talk about how having a child in the spectrum can be very stressful for caregivers and what we can do about it, and the strategies and tips that can be applied to reduce the caregiver stress. But before I begin, a little bit about us, basically about ARN. So Autism Recovery Network was established in 2005 and has been committed to helping children with autism and with other developmental delays. And we have different programs, but we are the leading provider of early intervention programs, not just in Singapore, but we also have centers in Hong Kong and Indonesia. And our goal is to help children reach key developmental milestones. So as you all know, some children do have delays, whether it's speech or any other areas. So we have a very organized and systematic way, which I'll talk about later, of helping your child gain more skills, whether it be academic or reading or spelling or anything that's related to skills that a child requires to be ready for mainstream education. And we have successfully handled over 3,000 cases over the years. And we believe that if early intervention is given to the child, early meaning it can be from anywhere after 2 years or sometimes even before. And if intervention is given early, then it can really make a difference to the child's abilities and skills. So moving on, our executive advisor is Dr. James Partington, and he is a leading expert in verbal behavior, and he guides us on a regular basis. We also use the ABLES, which is an educational tool developed by Dr. Partington. And he does visit us on a regular basis and provide training to the supervisors and the therapists at ARN. So moving on, today's webinar, the learning outcomes are understanding autism, the impact of stress on caregivers of children with autism, the parents' involvement in behavior management, strategies to overcoming caregiver stress, and lastly, question and answer session. So before I start, I just I just wanted to let you know that if you have questions along the way, please just make a note of it, and I will try and answer as many as I can at the end. I will give sufficient time for answering questions. And also, I apologize. Sometimes there might be some disturbances because we are in the big room here, and there's sometimes traffic outside, and the sound does sometimes interfere. So please excuse us for that. And then, so moving on, let's first talk about autism. So if there are parents of children with autism listening to me, joining me today, I'm sure you've read up about it and you know quite a bit about it. But I'm going to just touch on the areas which to increase your understanding. I'm not saying I know it all either. I have worked for quite a while with children with autism. So I'll share my experiences and my learnings. So just defining autism, it's a developmental disorder. It affects the individual's communication and behavior, and it makes a impact on the child's, the individual's life and the individual's caregiver's lives. So autism is diagnosed, there is a formal standardized way of diagnosing autism. You can't just look at a child and just immediately just say, yeah, this child has autism. It's not that simple. There is a formal method of doing it. The DSM-5 is actually a manual. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. 5 is basically the 5th edition. It's the most recent one is DSM-5. So the manual has criteria which a doctor or a psychologist has to follow while observing the child. So the doctor or the psychologist will observe the child, check with the DSM criteria, and if it meets the criteria, then the doctor might tell you, yes, the child may be on the spectrum. Another method used is the ADOS, which I haven't mentioned here, but you may have heard of it also. If you go to a hospital and want your diagnostic assessment done for your child, they might suggest the ADOS, Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, which again is a standardized tool to help you, to help the professional, help the doctor diagnose your child. But basically, when we look at DSM, these are the 3 main criteria for a diagnosis of autism. Persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction. And by persistent, I mean it's not just once in a while or in some situations. The child finds it challenging to communicate in various situations. Where it could be at home, it could be in school, it could be outside with friends. And by social communication, it's not only about speech. It's about making requests. It's about interacting, the reciprocal communication that happens, as in at the playground when a child goes and asks a question and then the other child answers. There's a up and down communication. So that is very difficult for some children with autism. Commonly, I mean, what happens is a child with autism prefers not to even play with other children, prefers to play on his or her own. Again, each child with autism is different, but this is a very common red flag. Like when the doctor will ask the parents, does your child like to play alone? So that is one red flag that maybe the child is on the spectrum. So they prefer being on their own. They don't like social activities, and social interaction is challenging for them. And that's why they prefer being on their own. Then they also tend to show restricted repetitive behaviors or interests. And that is, I'll talk about it in detail later, but mainly the child wants things to be in a particular way and is rigid about it. Like, for example, if I want to arrange my cars in this way, and that's it, that is the way I want it. If you change the order of my cars, the way I line them up, I'm going to really be upset. So that is restricted repetitive patterns of behavior. And this also includes stimming, which is a behavior which is repetitive, motor actions. It could be hand flapping, it could be turning around repeatedly, not just once. They want to do it over and over and over again. It could be washing hands with soap repeatedly. It could be anything repetitive. And so their interests are restricted, as in if they really like cars, then if you buy them any other kind of toy, they will just reject it. They'll say, I don't want that. I only want my red car with the yellow top. And that's all I want, and that's my interest. Nothing else matters. Nothing else is interesting. And all these behaviors, or if you can call them symptoms, I don't like using that word, but all these behaviors cause a major, significant impact on the child's life in different areas of functioning. And lastly, autism is a spectrum, which I will talk about later. It's not like one child with autism is never the same as another with autism. Each child is completely unique and different. So moving on, I like visuals, so I'm going to use as little words as possible and show you more pictures. So this is the triad of deficits. Triad meaning there are three main areas where a child with autism might face difficulty. One is language and communication. Most children with autism, I won't say all, but may show delayed speech as they're growing up. So parents commonly ask, why is he not talking? Or why is she not saying anything? She's 4 years old, or she's growing up and not able to say anything. So there might be speech delay. Other than speech delay, also difficulty communicating. Like, for example, I work with children who can talk, but when they want something, when they want to request something, they find it very hard to say, I want biscuit. Although they know and they know biscuit, but they are not able to plan and put those words together and say it. And so they might point to biscuit, or they might pull their parents' hand and say, give me biscuit, and the parent may not be able to understand, might find it hard to understand. So communication is another area which is very challenging for some children with autism. Then behavior, the second area is, as I mentioned, a child with autism might show repetitive behaviors, might show rigidity in behaviors, might want things in a particular way. Transitions may be very difficult. Like, for example, sudden changes might cause the child to get very upset. Like just now he was in grandparents' house, suddenly you've taken him, put him in the car, taken him to another friend's house. And then you might see this child having a meltdown and wonder why. Why is this child so upset? We just changed the place. But for the child, a transition might be very difficult. And so that's why it's very important. I'll discuss the strategies later, but it's very important to have structure in your child's day and not sudden changes. And the last area is social interaction. So basically, this I mentioned earlier, but basically interacting with friends or peers or anybody actually is challenging for them. A simple thing like even answering their name, like when someone calls their name, although they know their name, they may not respond. Eye contact is inconsistent. And all these small pieces of the puzzle are very important for a social interaction. What we take for granted when we go and talk to our friends, there are so many skills involved and we don't realize it. And these skills are what we need to build in a child with autism. Moving on, this is a similar visual, but it's a little more in depth. I'll not go through each one of them, but as you can see, let's go to the first one. Social interaction basically is maybe unresponsive when someone calls their name, maybe low eye contact, poor eye contact, maybe using gestures to communicate and not verbally communicating. Then moving on to communication, might be difficult to initiate a conversation or maintain a conversation. So I've worked with a child who's very verbal, she talks a lot, but she doesn't know how to initiate a friendship. Like she doesn't know how to go up to a friend and say, hi, my name is this, what's your name, how old are you? And that's a challenge for her. And we might find it, so it's such a simple skill, it's such a simple thing to do, but for her, it's not. And we need to understand that. We need to understand the difficulty. And the last one is activities and interests, which I've mentioned earlier, basically rigidity, wanting things in a particular way, it has to be that way. And also things like unusual or repetitive gestures or actions. So for some, I mean, basically stimming behaviors, and stimming can be a variety of behaviors. It could be verbal stimming, like a child who goes on saying the same thing and likes listening to that sound. It could be using hands or legs. It could be twirling around. It could be anything that is repetitive. And we find it very, like when you see a child engaging in that kind of behavior, obviously it is not something that's expected or socially acceptable. So we wonder what's wrong, something's wrong with that child. But I'll talk about stimming later. It's basically a way through which a child with autism is regulating himself or herself. And I need you all to also think that how many times you also tend to stim sometimes. Like sometimes people like curling their hair, putting their fingers through their hair or shaking their leg. When you're stressed, you might show some repetitive behavior as well. It's just the difference is for children with autism, it's much more and it's much more visible. It's much more severe than us. But it's a way of regulation. So moving on. Yeah, this is what I was mentioning earlier, that autism is a spectrum. I like to call it a rainbow. Autism is a rainbow with different colors, with different shades. No two children with autism are identical. So we have level 1, 2, and 3 in autism spectrum disorder, and that's why it's called a spectrum disorder. We have level 1, which is high functioning autism, which is what I just mentioned, a child I'm working with. She's very verbal, very talkative, loves to play. And if you see her, if you just walk across, let's say she's in her school or she's at the supermarket, you will never ever think that she has autism because she's so normal, as people call it. I don't like using that word normal, but neurotypical. She looks neurotypical, but she finds it very hard to make friends, very hard to initiate, ask for help. Very difficult. She finds it difficult to organize herself. So, like to make sure things are in her bag, to how do I take out things and plan things. So organization is also an issue for her. And she does sometimes show inflexibility, which is rigidity in behavior. So she wants things her way. It's my way or the highway. So that's inflexibility. And a level 2 is requiring substantial support. So this is definitely slightly more severe. Inflexibility is there, sensory issues might be there, repetitive behaviors are there, and marked deficit in social interactions. So these children, you may be able to make out, if you just have a look at them or observe them for 5 to 10 minutes, you might make out that there's something not right, something missing. And level 3 is severe autism, where the child might be not non-verbal, as in non-verbal means not able to say words, but maybe only make sounds. Might find it very hard to communicate and extremely difficult. Finds it extremely difficult to handle change and a lot of repetitive behaviors. So, but as I said, there's no two children who are similar. So some children, I've actually seen some children who may be very high functioning in math, let's say they're very good with additions, but their social skills is like really low. It's really difficult for them to even say hi to a friend. And at the same time, there might be a child who's got severe autism, as in very difficult communicating, but cognitively may not be that low. So I've seen a non-verbal child who was able to read and write. So let's not, we should not just compartmentalize them and say autism means they're all low or, they're all non-verbal. Each child is completely different. Okay, so moving on to the next one, this is another visual which I really like. So basically this visual is a iceberg, and it was developed by this psychologist long back in 1995, actually not that long ago, by Eric Schopler. So he first used it in 1995 to explain the behavior problems in children with autism. So when we look at a child with autism, let's say a child tantruming in public or showing aggression in public or stimming in public, we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. We're only seeing the behaviors which are visible. But what we sometimes, and sometimes even I've done it, what we sometimes fail to do is look at the bottom part, under the water. There is so much there which we need to understand. The child might be tantruming because he finds it difficult to handle change. He finds it difficult to mingle with others, has difficulty with social skills, has sensory processing problems, something which we may not talk about. We might just push it under the carpet and say, forget it, the sensory and all is all, it's nonsense. It's not, but it's not. It affects the child's behavior. The inability to express oneself. Can you imagine how difficult it must be for the child? I mean, the child is trying to say it, trying to express himself, but nobody seems to understand him or her. And the words coming out don't seem to make sense. And then the caregivers are like, what do you want? We don't understand. So, I mean, we can't blame anybody. This is not, it's not about blaming. It's about understanding that it's very hard for the child to express himself and can be so frustrating that nobody understands me. And sometimes even lack of understanding. So some children may not understand instructions. And let's say I tell a child who's got autism, I give him 5 long instructions, and then I expect him to follow all 5. I mean, let's be realistic and practical. Even a neurotypical child will find that hard. So let's break down instructions, maybe simplify, and also remember children with autism are visual learners. So visuals really do help. If you want them to keep their bag and take out water bottle, you can use a visual, and that really does help children with autism organize. So this is something you can look at later as well and just think about. But the main purpose for me showing this is that when a child with autism shows these behaviors, these unacceptable behaviors, I just want parents, caregivers, and everyone watching to understand that they are not being naughty, they're not doing drama. I've heard a lot of caregivers saying this. There is a reason for the child behaving that way, and we need to be detectives and find out what is the reason. Why? Did the child have too many things today? Did the child go for class in the morning and then maybe preschool in the morning, didn't take a nap, and then I expect him to do 10 math problems? Is it realistic? Should I modify my demands? So these are some questions you need to ask yourself. Okay, so before I go on to this is a short video. Before I move on to this, I just want to talk a little bit about sensory processing. And children with autism have a lot of sensory processing difficulties. I'm not an OT, so I don't know everything about it. But what I know about it is basically when we see the world, we have a lot of inputs coming in, visual inputs, auditory inputs. I can hear the sound of cars going by. But I'm able to filter, my brain is able to filter those inputs, and I can, because I'm in the webinar, I can say, okay, I don't need to listen to that, I have to focus on this. I'm able to regulate and adjust these inputs. But for children with autism, a lot of children, maybe not all, but for children with autism, it's difficult to, plug out, and it's difficult for them to sieve through all these inputs. And sometimes it gets very overwhelming for them because their brains are not able to process the sensory information as effectively as we do. So sometimes, let's say there's a siren, there's a police car going by, and I can hear it, but I'm not affected by it. But a child with autism will start crying, or might just cover his ears and say, I can't handle this anymore. Because the way they perceive it is it may be amplified, it may be very loud for them, and they are not able to handle it. And it's the way their brains have been wired. It's not because they're behaving that way because it's too loud, or it's because they're not able to process information as easily as we do. So this video is about a girl. This is a real life video of a girl. Her name is Kali. And she's actually now not a girl anymore. She's a young lady. She's, I think, 22 years old now, if I'm not mistaken. And she is a non-verbal child. She doesn't talk even now, but she communicates using technology. And it's just a video to make you understand how sensory difficulties can affect a child with autism, and also the inability to communicate. That can also affect the child. So let's watch the video.
I can't wait for a coffee. Oh, hello, barista.
What do you girls want?
Skim soy latte?
Taryn, soy can't be skim.
Hot chocolate, orange juice?
No, Dad, I want a coffee. Hot chocolate? Great.
So I was thinking of going to Sarah's later. Could you give me a ride?
Yeah, sure. Are you cool with taking your sister?
Yeah.
Wait. What? I have my own plan.
Carly.
Okay, I'll see you tonight, okay?
Carly. How can I help?
Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So I hope you got to see that video. So the main takeaway I hope you could make out from the video is that first of all, the video is through Carly's eyes. It's not through the parents' eyes. And it's how tough it is for her to express herself because she wanted a coffee and her dad didn't even give her that choice. And then it was like hot chocolate and she was already not very happy about that. And then with all those noises, the coffee grinder and people walking in, something we take for granted was very disturbing for her. And then she was not able to regulate herself and handle all the sensory inputs all around her. It was too much of noise. And what I liked about the ending was that the dad, that's her dad in the video, and that's her sister, the other girl is her sister, and how her dad, at the end, he says, how can I help? So we're not here to judge Carly, we're not here to tell her that, no, this is not how you behave in public, you are very naughty and all that, which is usually the conventional way of handling it, or the parent himself getting stressed and just leaving the coffee shop. But the dad just was calm and was like, how can I help? What can I do to calm you down? And that's the approach which would really help a child, because as it is, the child is stressed. And then your stress, you also, a caregiver also being stressed, just transfers onto the child and just doubles the stress. So I would like, I mean, that was what I took away from the video. So moving on, talking about what is caregiver stress. And this is just a definition I found online. It's a psychological reaction to the demands of being a parent. So it's not just parents of children with autism who face it, all parents face it. It's in the real world. We're not in this movie where all children are cooperative, follow instructions, do everything perfectly. Every parent faces caregiver stress, but the only difference is with parents of children with autism, the stress can be more chronic, can be more long-term, can be more intensive. And especially if you don't have an understanding of autism, you don't have an understanding of why is my child behaving this way, then the stress can really get overwhelming and it can really take over your life. And your life can really not be the way, you may not be content because of caregiver stress. And in this picture, I know it looks like a mom with two kids who's really stressed, but actually caregiver stress can be experienced by anybody who's taking care of a child. And so it could be aunts, uncles, grandparents, helpers, anybody who's taking care of the child can experience this stress. And this is a model, again, I found online, which is interesting. It's like a balance. So on the one hand, we have stressors, strains, and challenges that every caregiver faces with the child. So even with neurotypical children, handling their tantrums, handling their demands, thinking of what to make for dinner. You may be working and handling home. So all those stresses are there on the left, which is the demands. And on the right are your capabilities as a caregiver, your coping mechanisms, your support systems. And what happens with parents, and not just parents, caregivers of children with autism is the demands tend to outweigh the capabilities. So because their child is unable to sometimes reach their expectations, obviously the expectation was that my child will be able to go mainstream school, my child will be able to go work when they grow up. And when these expectations are not completely realized, then obviously it is frustrating, it is disappointing. And that's when these negative thoughts or frustrations are there, then your demands tend to outweigh your capabilities or your resources. And that's when caregiver stress can get overwhelming. And it's a researched fact that 80% of caregivers of children with autism report being stretched beyond their limits. Parents of children with autism have higher rates of stress, anxiety, and depression than parents of typically developing children and children with other developmental disabilities as well. And I would think one reason why autism is so difficult for parents to handle children with autism is because when you look at your child, there does not seem to be any deficit. They are eating, sleeping, walking, they're able to see, talk, hear, everything seems fine. But there's an invisible something which is not there or which is missing. And that's why parents are, it's like frustrating because, you're able to talk, you're able to say this, and why didn't you do it this way? What happened? Why are you not able to meet friends and say hi and play with them? Why can't you do it this? So when that gap in expectation and what's reality happens, so that's when caregiver stress is the result. And this I just spoke about, but it's just a recap. So when parents blame themselves and wonder if it is their fault that their child got a diagnosis, which is absolutely a wrong belief. And I would just like to say that it's not your fault. It's not the caregiver's fault. It's not the parent's fault. And when you compare your child with neurotypical children, when you meet other children who are neurotypical, you think, oh, I wish, if only, and all those thoughts get into your mind, and that's again a negative thought. Frustration as your child does not reach expectations, and then if your child shows challenging behavior, disrupted sleep and feeding patterns, which can create havoc in a caregiver's life. If the child just doesn't want to sleep or sleeps just 3 hours in the night, then it does take a toll on the caregiver and it affects the caregiver's mental health. Ambiguity in understanding the child's abilities and needs. So this is what I spoke about. So I would like to share an incident actually that happened here in the center. So as I mentioned, I work with a child who is quite high functioning. And one parent, I was taking another child before taking this high functioning child. And I was just saying bye to the child I had taken, the session that had finished. And then the parent of that child saw this high functioning, this girl who's quite high functioning. And she asked me, she's like, why is this child in ARN? She's able to talk, she's seems fine, she talks in full sentences. Why is she in ARN? So that's that ambiguity in understanding that, a child with high functioning autism can still have challenges. And so you should not underestimate their challenges just because they can talk, just because they are smart. They still have challenges. And sometimes social support may be reduced when, let's say, family members find out that this child has been diagnosed and they're not supportive. If you get the family support, it's like amazing. But let's say that family support is reduced because of the diagnosis, it can be very disappointing and very difficult. And of course, financial stressors and anxiety about the future, because you're wondering where is my child going to be, let's say 10 years from now, when my child has to think about, being independent, think about jobs or working. Where's my child going to go? So all these things, this creates anxiety in the caregiver. And the reason it is a problem and the reason we're talking about it today, I mean, I'm not going to go on about caregiver stress and say it's really difficult, it's really hard, and then just keep talking about that. No, the reason we have to do something about it is because caregiver stress directly affects the child. And negatively affects the child. It affects the caregiver's health, of course, and well-being, but it interferes with effective parenting. If you are not satisfied or happy and have a lot of stress, then you will not be able to function as an effective parent. It's very simple as that. And then it also limits your life. If you're constantly stressed, you're not able to enjoy relationships with others. You're not able to, let's say, go out. Life is limited if caregiver stress takes over. And it also limits your ability to support your child, and it counteracts with the effects of child's interventions. For example, I mean, I would say that at ARN, whatever interventions we do with the child, we discuss with the parents. We keep the parents involved because most children spend more time with parents, with caregivers, more than in ARN. So whatever we're doing it here, we tell the parents so they can practice it at home. But let's say we tell the parents all the strategies, but the parent is unable to, take up these interventions at home. The parent is unable to carry forward. And so then the intervention is not consistent. Like intervention is there here, but it's not there at home. So then, honestly speaking, the intervention then does not work, because we both have to be on the same page. We both have to do practice those interventions. And if a caregiver is under a lot of stress, it's highly unlikely that this caregiver can carry out these interventions. It's going to be very challenging. And so that's why caregiver stress needs to be tackled, needs to be addressed, because it's important for the child. And so what we're going to focus on today is to change what we just saw, the previous picture, where the balance was tilting towards demands, to change it to the second picture, which is a more balanced weighing scale, where the demands are reduced, and so the weighing scale goes up, and we increase the coping mechanisms and resources so that there's a balance. And we'll talk about how we can do that. So the first one is to reduce demands and stressors, reduce the weight on the left side, collaborate with experienced professionals, and enhance your child's current skills and abilities. So that's exactly what I spoke about. Like in ARN, we encourage collaboration. It's not that we are the experts, we know everything, and we don't care what you do at home. No, it's not that way. So we have tips, we have strategies, we share it with the parents, and then if the parents have problems, they come back to us, talk to us about it. We discuss within ourselves, and then we again discuss with the parents. So it's an ongoing process. So collaboration is very important. And if your child is showing disruptive behaviors, we do provide strategies for that to help you out. And I'm not going to say that every time we provide strategies, it's magic and the behavior disappears. No, but at least we try and figure out how to reduce those behaviors and increase adjusted behaviors, increase positive behaviors. And we also encourage treatment for sleeping and feeding problems. If the child has feeding problems or sleeping problems, if the child is a picky eater, it may not be just behavior, it may be something intrinsic. So we do also ask speech therapists to give their inputs, because feeding has a lot to do with, there's a lot of things that go on with feeding, a lot of processes involved. So it may not be just your child being misbehaving. It may be difficult for the child to chew and swallow. So we look into all that. And this is the model we use here at ARN. We employ ABA, verbal behavior, which is a method we use to enhance your child's current skills. So when your child comes into ARN, we first assess your child and we make a note of all your child's current abilities. What is your child able to do now? Where are the difficulties? Does your child show behaviors? Does your child show stimming? We make a note of all that. And then through ABA-VB, we focus on those areas. We concentrate on those areas where there are difficulties, where your child might need help. And then it's through ABA-VB that we enhance these skills, and we keep track of it. It's not just that we just work on enhancing and then we don't know where the child is at. Every 6 months, we keep track of the child's abilities. And I'll talk about how we do that. And ABA VB is not like the old fashioned ABA, which was more just like rote and, a mechanical robotic ABA. No, it's more dynamic and more functional. So it believes on the main concept of ABA VB is we work around the child's interests and child's motivation. For example, if your child loves cookies, so then we first work on that. We first work on the child being able to request for a cookie. And if the child is non-verbal, we will teach both the word and the sign for cookie. And then we make the child learn that if you request for cookie, you get cookie. You don't just get it for free. You just don't get it and you snatch it and get it. No, it doesn't work that way. And so we build on the child's interests, whatever the child likes. And so we keep it positive. It's not about, we're not punishing the child. We're not using any negative strategies. It's always positive. And as the child progresses, we increase the difficulty. So first we get to know the child, make the child like us, and then we give the child work and slowly increase the difficulty. It's not just in the beginning itself, we give the child a lot to do. So slowly we enhance the difficulty level of what we're teaching. And this is what we teach. It's a variety of skills, and it's not just only academics. It's not just only communication. It all depends on the child. Where is the child right now? If the child is very good at, let's say, numbers and mathematics, we are not going to focus so much on that. But we focus maybe on social skills, which is where the child needs help. And we do work on academic skills for children who are getting ready for school as well. So it's a variety of skills. There's language, there's social skills, academic, self-help skills, motor skills as well, imitation as well. This is just a short video. Hold on, I will just stop my video. Okay.
We teach them new words and explain their meaning to expand their vocabulary. Decoding words improves their ability to recognize letter sounds and read words they're unfamiliar with.
W says, E says, T says, W, T.
What at is the wet?
Good job.
In the calendar activity, the child is prompted to fill in the missing words in their respective areas, days, months, and so on.
Yeah, 20 here.
Yeah, what year is it?
It's 20.
20. Yeah, that's right, 2020.
Matching words to words and words to pictures helps kids to improve their sight reading skills.
All right. Okay. Sorry. Okay, 1 second. I'm just trying to get the video back. Okay. Hold on, sorry. Okay, yeah. Sorry once again. I hope you can see me now. Yeah. Oh Lord, okay. Okay, moving on. Yeah, okay. It's back now. Sorry about that. Some technical issues. So our programs, as you saw, as you may have seen the video just now. So that was basically one of our therapists teaching a child reading skills. And so it's a lot of skills involved in reading. And so it's like word recognition, phonics, and a calendar activity. It could be a variety of activities to help the child read, be a better reader. Okay, moving on to the next one. learn. Yes, sorry about that. So our programs are varied. We have one-to-one therapy, which is a very intensive therapy, which is is just the therapist and the child one-on-one, and it can be from 15 to 40 hours of therapy per week. And as I said, we teach a variety of skills. It could also be group, like a class, a group of children who we teach, and it's the Little Achievers program, which is basically more support for your child to learn effectively and to be ready for mainstream school. And then the third program we have is social thinking, which is more for children who are finding it difficult with social skills only. So they may be verbal, they may be able to talk very well, but to think flexibly and to make friends easily and to enhance their social skills, we employ this program. Okay, so now just a little, I'll just speak a bit about the ABLES. So the ABLES is an educational tool which we use. It's called the Assessment of Basic Learning and Language Skills, and it was developed by Dr. Partington, who is our advisor, who I spoke about earlier. And so this is how we keep track of a child's skills. We don't just randomly work with the child and then not know where the child is at after 6 months. So we have an individualized curriculum for each child. And then when the child comes into ARN, the first day, let's say the first session, we will make a note of all their skills and record it in a grid. It's called a grid. It's like a graph. And we record the child's skills in various areas. And as you can see, the blue boxes is what the child is able to do. And you can see there are a lot of empty boxes. If the child is not able to do a lot of, let's say, in the intraverbals. Intraverbals is basically answering questions, filling in the blanks. So let's say I ask the child, how old are you? And they don't know how to say, I'm 5 years old. So that's an intraverbal. So this child, when he came in, he was not able to really effectively answer questions. But then after, so this was at 4 years, 3 months. And every 6 months, his IEP, his individualized education plan, is reviewed by the supervisor and the therapist who takes him or her. And then this is the child after, it's not after 6 months, so it's after 2 years, approximately 2 years. So you can see that there's definitely an improvement in a lot of skills, not just in 1 or 2 areas, but there are more colored boxes. There are fewer empty boxes. And the reason they're in different colors is because like every 6 months we're updating it, right? So every 6 months we use a different color. So it gives us also a better idea where the child is. So this is how we track the child's progress and see, and let's say we don't see much improvement. We don't see a lot of boxes being filled. Then we change the way we're teaching. We have to figure out a way that makes the child progress further and the boxes get filled faster. So this is the ABLES, how we use the ABLES. And then coming to challenging behavior. So I can have another, I believe there was a webinar previously about managing challenging behaviors by two of my, Belle and teacher Dino. So we can go into it. It's like another webinar. It can go on forever, but I'm just gonna touch on different strategies that can be employed to handle challenging behavior. So the main thing we use here in ARN is we work as detectives and find out what was the cause, what was the antecedent, we call it. Antecedent means what was the, what happened before the behavior happened. So was there a change? Did someone do or say something? What happened when this happened, and that's what resulted in the behavior. What was the trigger? Basically, we find out what was the trigger, when and where did it happen, and what is the function of the behavior. By function of behavior, it's basically answering the question, why is this child behaving this way? So believe it or not, every behavior your child shows, every single behavior, there is a reason for it. It's not just random. Behavior happens for a reason, and it is for us to figure out why this behavior happened. And so find out the function of the behavior. Is it that the child, is there something wrong medically? Like, is the child got a tummy ache? Really, is the child not well? that does also trigger behavior. Is it because the child wants to escape the task? So maybe you've given the child a difficult task and the child wants to escape. And that's when the child figures out what behavior will make me escape. I have a lot of smart children who I work with who, they know how to floor, they know how to kick and start tantruming. And then they just know that I'm going to stop giving him or her the work. And that's escape. So we need to figure out if it is escape, then what we do is we don't let the child escape and we reduce the demands. Let's say we make we make the work quite easy, and then we let the child do a very easy task and then let the child take a break. So it's not that we completely stop the child from escaping, but we don't let the child learn that I tantrum, I shout, and then I will get a break and I'll escape. So that's one strategy we use to understand. And so every behavior has a function. We figure out the function, we figure out the reason and work around that. Then modify task demands, as I said, we need to understand the difference between won't and can't. So you might see that the child is not doing his work or crumpling up his paper, but is the child able to do it? Is it too tough for him? Is it too hard for him? Is there a skill deficit? The child is, let's say, not able to hold a pencil properly, does not have a proper grip and is not able to write alphabets. And then you're giving him a worksheet which requires him to write words. And then your child shows behavior and then you're like, you're just being naughty. You're not really doing your work. But that's not the reason. The reason is maybe it's too hard for the child. Maybe you can just start by tracing, lower your demands, slowly work on tracing, strengthen that, and then move on to words. So we do modify task demands based on how the child is behaving. Recognize your child's sensory challenges, which I spoke about earlier. So let's say your child has a lot of sensory issues. Prepare a room which is maybe less noise and maybe less clutter. Minimize things in the environment. And that, believe me or not, believe me, that affects the child's behavior. And when there is structure in the child's life, children with autism love structure. They love that they know what's going to come up next. So if you have a visual schedule for the child, that helps a lot. If you have a plan for the child and tell the child, okay, first you're going to do work, and then we're going to go swimming or whatever, we're going to go down to the playground and play. And then so the child knows first this, then this. And then you will see a difference in the child's behavior when there's predictability. And when there's sudden changes, we need to understand it's difficult for the child. A child with autism finds it very difficult when there's suddenly a change or suddenly a change in plan. But having said that, we do teach children with autism, children who come to our center, to be more flexible. We are not going to encourage rigidity, obviously. We live in a world which is fluid. Everything is not always planned. But we have to be sensitive to the fact that if there's a change, the child might show behavior if there's a sudden change, and we need to be prepared for that. We need to employ visuals, because children with autism, most of them are visual learners. They will really work better if there's a visual, whether it's a task, whether it's an instruction. They work well with real life visuals, not just clip art, but real visuals. And stay tuned to your child. Listen to your child. Your child might not be able to talk, but he is still communicating. And he's still telling you, I don't like this activity. I don't want to do this. Don't force me to do this. So listen to him. And then I'm not saying give in to him every time. No, if sometimes work has to be done, has to be done. But maybe you can also modify as a caregiver the stance that, okay, maybe not 2 pages today, maybe just 1 page today, and then I'll give you a lot of fun things to do. Always use a reinforcer which your child loves. And ABA works on that principle that, we use a lot of toys. It could be toys, it could be videos, it could be music, anything that the child enjoys. So if the child finishes his work, he or she gets that reward, that reinforcer. And you will see how the child quickly understands, if I do this, then I will get this. And that really does work. So these are some of the ways. There are many ways actually, and we can talk more about it, but these are some of the ways for children with autism, for caregivers to manage their challenging behavior. And most importantly, which we should not take for granted, is self-care. And taking care of yourself is very important, equally important. And very commonly parents, I won't say just parents, caregivers might feel guilty or might feel, how can I, take out time for myself and my child needs me. Yes, your child needs you. You're absolutely right. But it's essential to sometimes, if you're able to, just take some time out and just, it may be just a cup of coffee, or it may be just going out 10 minutes for a walk. It doesn't have to be something luxury or some going to a hotel. Nowadays we can't even do that. But it's just some time out for yourself, because remember, if you are healthy, if you are at peace, that will help your child. And I like this visual. You can't pour from an empty cup. So if you are really stressed, if you don't feel you have time for yourself, then you will not be a happy parent or happy caregiver, and that affects your child. So remember to do that. Remember to take care of yourself. And this is an interesting visual which you can just take a look at, but it could be just seconds or a few minutes in a day when you take out time for yourself. And I know it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm a parent too. And there are days when, honestly speaking, I want to get out of my house and just, leave my kids and just go. And, I feel like pulling my hair out sometimes. It gets really hard. And I know with a child with autism, it can be really difficult. I'm never going to deny that. But it's important to take those few minutes or even 20 minutes a day to, if you're able to, and if someone's able to take care of your child, go for a walk or go drink some coffee or just get a break for yourself. And it's not wrong to do that. Don't feel guilty to do that. Get a manicure, get a massage, or whatever you can do. Just get it done so that you are your cup is full. So if your cup is full, you will be able to help your child. Remember that. Yeah, so we've actually reached the end of the webinar. And if you have any questions, I would be able to answer them right now. I actually have a few questions already which had been posted earlier, and I could first answer those questions. Just a second, it's here. Okay, I'll start off with the questions which were posted earlier. So one question which is quite relevant to today's discussion was, how do you help children when they have a meltdown? So a meltdown is a full-blown tantrum, and of course, every parent who goes through this, it's not pleasant, it's not fun. Nobody wants a tantrum to happen, a meltdown to happen. But my only advice as a therapist and as a parent myself is, main thing is, when your child is going through a meltdown, the caregiver needs to be calm. And I know it's easier said than done. It's easy to just say it. It's difficult to practice it, but it's very important that you stay calm. And the second thing is, make sure your child is safe, you are safe. If the child is hurting himself, let's say head banging himself, he could definitely get into a serious injury or get hurt. So make sure your child is safe. And the third thing is, the only way you go through a tantrum or meltdown is to go through it. There is no magic wand which will suddenly make the tantrum disappear, but you have to wait it out, wait for the tantrum to calm down. Your child will calm down. But at that time, when your child is tantruming, don't try to talk to your child, give instructions to your child, scold your child. It's not entering his brain at that moment. There's no point telling the child, be quiet, don't cry. It's going to only make him more upset. And if it is a sensory issue, let's say your child has had too much noise and something is too noisy and that has upset him, you talking and trying to talk to him or her will just trigger him or more. So just be calm, be next to your child. Your child knows you're there. You don't neglect or just ignore your child, and you're there, but at the same time, you're not gonna, it's not acceptable behavior, absolutely. You wait for the child to calm down, and then if your child is verbal, you can talk about it. If your child is able to tell you, I'm feeling very upset because it's noisy, talk about it. Do not put down the child or scold the child. And at the same time, if it is behavior, if it is tantruming because of attention-seeking behavior, Then again, once the child calms down, clearly talk to them and tell them this is not acceptable. If they're able to understand that, if the child is unable to understand that, then you just have to explain to the child, mommy doesn't like this. I don't want you doing this. And then explain to the child, if you do this, you will get something which will be pleasant. Like if you show me quiet hands, if you don't hit me, I'm going to give you, let's say, your favorite toy or your favorite activity or your favorite video. But if you show me this kind of unacceptable behavior, you are not, the consequences you're not going to get. And you will be surprised how young children, as young as 2 years old, understand the connection. And they understand, they're very smart, they understand who they can have a tantrum with. I've had children who've had tantrums with mommy, but they don't have tantrums with their dad. And they're very aware. They know that mom will give in. I cry a bit, I start kicking, and mom will say, okay, here, take the remote, watch TV. And that's it, they've learned. One time you have to do it, and that's it, they've learned. I need to show this, and I'll get what I want. So that's one question that was there. Then another question is, I just want to know strategies to support family members of children with ASD. That's what we've been talking about. Is there any role of a counselor to work with the family? Absolutely. I mean, it's as I mentioned in the previous slide, caregivers of children with autism have a lot to handle. They are stretched from in every direction. So if you are able to help them by helping them with, like we are able to help the child by, enhancing their skills, and that will reduce a lot of stress on the parent. But also if the parent is able to talk to somebody about it and talk to them and let them just explore their feelings and how they feel so disappointed or frustrated or just heartbroken that my child got a diagnosis, and if they're able to let it out, it is definitely helpful for the parents and for the caregivers, and indirectly it will help the child. So definitely, if a caregiver needs counseling, and if the caregiver is aware that they need help, they need counseling, I would say get as much support and help as you can. It could be a counselor, it could be your friend, your best friend, it could be a family member, anyone who you can talk to. It will help you, and it will help your mental health. And then what are the strategies to enforce children with behavior such as pinching, biting, pulling hair? So as I mentioned, I cannot give you any strategies unless I actually see the child and understand what happened before this behavior and what happened after this behavior as well. So we commonly use the ABC model, which is, as I mentioned earlier, antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. So when the behavior happened, what happened before the child was pinching or biting, and then when the child pinched or bit somebody, what happened after that? Did the child get what he wanted? If the child got what he wanted after biting somebody, then for sure the behavior is going to repeat again. It's going to happen again. The child is getting what he wants through that behavior. So every behavior, as I mentioned, has a function. So it's important to understand the ABC of the behavior. And then once you understand that, then we can work on how to reduce the behavior. And as I said, through extinction, we work on extinction. Extinction means reducing and, if possible, removing completely disruptive behaviors. And immediately, obviously, the behavior is not going to go away. Let's say the behavior has been happening for 5 years, and then suddenly you expect it to go away with ABA, ABB. It's not realistic, but it won't suddenly go away, but we work on reducing it gradually till maybe it's very minimal, very less. So that is one of the strategies. I think that also is similar to this question, how to address a defiant toddler. So again, defiance is a very generic word. It's a big word. We need to go down to specifics of behavior. What is the child doing that you labeled as defiant? And why is the child doing this? There is a reason the child does it. And it's not just random behavior. No child was born defiant. So there's something that is in the environment. The child finds that if I do it, I get what I want. And we need to figure that out. We need to be detectives and figure that out. What are the strategies that a parent of a child with autism can do at home to de-stress? So I had mentioned this earlier. So de-stressing can be at home. It can, if you want to de-stress at home, then if it's possible, let's say your spouse is able to take your child maybe just even for 10 minutes down to the playground, and you're at home and you just don't worry about anything and just maybe watch your favorite serial on TV, or just drink a cup of coffee, or take deep breaths, do yoga. It can, any of these can be, whatever works for you, and relaxes your mind. It could be praying, it could be music. Any of these can be ways to de-stress. Any ideas in real life of replacement behavior for overload sensory needs like hearing, movement, touch, okay, for use in mainstream school? So what I understand here is, let's say a child is having a sensory overload. Sensory overload is what I spoke about earlier, where there's too many senses activated at the same time and the child is unable to handle it. Any real life example of replacement behavior? So I would say, from whatever knowledge I have, and because I said I'm not an OT, but let's say your child is a sensory seeker, meaning the child wants a lot of touch, movement, loves movement. Let's say the child loves to run around. I worked with a child like that. And it's very difficult to get the child to do work when the child is all over the place running around. But at the same time, it's important to give the child that input. The child is seeking it. So start off with maybe just one little task, which is hands quiet. Put your hands on the table. And the child does it, and then you're like, wow, awesome, great job. You make it, celebrate it, and then you give the maybe child a toy to play with, or something that the child likes, so that he continues sitting down. And then let's say the child is sat down for 5 minutes, then you reward the child by letting them run around. So give them that option to run around. Give them movement if that's what they want. Give them a massage if that's what they want. So it depends on what your child wants in terms of sensory inputs. And of course, seeking help from an OT also would help, because they would also know and give you more strategies on how to handle this. Okay, my child refuses to eat solid food till now. I have to grind the food into puree. How can I overcome this situation? Okay, so again, this depends on why the child is not able to chew as yet. It could be behavior. Yes, there are children who are very fussy eaters and don't want to chew. I myself personally had issues with my daughter who didn't want to chew and wanted pureed food. But it's not only behavior sometimes, and as I said, it could be an intrinsic factor. And the only way is get help. Ask someone like a speech therapist to help with the feeding. If that's not possible, slowly, give them slowly. Maybe first, it's 1 week you've been giving puree. Then the next week you slowly decrease, give it a little more texture, meaning don't puree it so much. And the difference should not be much, just a little bit coarser. And then slowly, let's say the child gets used to that, then slowly, increase to a little more lumps in the food. Another method is you could just say, okay, a little bit of the lumpy food, and then you get something you really like to eat, like let's say, or something you really like to do. So again, the if then, you eat little bit and then you get this. The main thing is to make feeding not a negative experience. It should never be force feeding, and it should never be like, you have to do this. Feeding there's a lot that goes into feeding. So as much as possible, make it enjoyable. And if your child is not finishing the food, don't stress yourself over it. If your child is healthy, walking around, able to talk and able to do other things, then don't stress if, I made so much and you ate only a little bit. Don't stress. Okay, maybe your child is not hungry right now. Maybe he had milk an hour back and he's not hungry. So take it as it comes. Don't let it be a stressful experience. And then gradually desensitize your child from puree. Gradually desensitize your child. Increase the texture. If necessary, go to an expert like a speech therapist or feeding expert. I hope that answers your question. And then another question is, this child walks on his toes. Any chances to know why he walks on his toes? Okay, so tiptoeing is a very common feature in children with autism, and parents have this as a very common question: why do they tiptoe? So it could be a sensory need. It's most probably it is a sensory need. So I would say the child requires more inputs. And I'm not going to say that if you give the child sensory inputs, the tiptoeing is going to completely stop. But I would say see a doctor about it or an OT about it, because I've also read, there are a lot of articles out there, but I've also read that the child's diet also affects tiptoeing. So I don't know how much of that is true, but it's worth researching and finding out about. And even after you change the diet, I would say that it may not completely go away, but it might reduce. So there might be a variety of reasons, and it could be sensory, as I said, it could be something intrinsic, and it could be a variety of factors. So that's about tiptoeing. How to help a child stop whining, and how to stop them talking inappropriately. Okay, so again, inappropriately is a huge, it's quite general, but I would say if it's the whining, I would say not to reinforce that behavior, because what commonly happens unconsciously, I won't blame the parents and the caregivers, but when your child whines, says, please, I mean, I can't do it, or give me iPad, then you just want the whining to stop, and then you tend to just maybe give in and say, okay, take the iPad here, take it for 5 minutes. And right there, you've created a pattern where the child knows, oh, I whine a bit, maybe make a sad face, and my mom or dad or whoever is a caregiver will just give in. So the main thing is to try, if possible, to ignore whining, and to even clearly tell the child, if the child understands that if you ask me nicely, you will get what you want, but if you're going to whine, then I'm not going to give you what you want. So the child clearly understands the whining is not what mom wants, and I'm not going to get it if I whine. And if I ask nicely, I will get it. And the same thing with inappropriate talk. Of course, you don't want them to do it in public. And if they're doing it in public, you're not going to just ignore it. It's not possible to ignore it. But you could, if they're cognitively able, if they're able to understand, you could give them a consequence right there. Like in public, let's say they use a very bad word, then you can say something like, mommy didn't like, or I didn't like what you just said. And when we go home, I'm going to you're not going to get, let's say, 20 minutes of iPad, or you're not going to get to go playground today, because this is not acceptable. But again, it depends on the child. If your child is not too young and not able to understand this consequence, then of course it won't work. So if it's a young child, then definitely you can explain to them or tell them that no, don't do that. It's not right. And when they show good behavior, catch them being good is the very famous phrase. So when they're showing good behavior, reward it, reinforce it. So then they clearly understand, wow, my dad really likes it when I talk nicely. And so this is one strategy you can use. I think that's about it with the questions. If you need to know more, or if you want to talk to us more about strategies or about autism or about anything really that is related to the topic we spoke about, then you can definitely get in touch with us. You can connect with us and let us know your concerns or your queries. So I think we've reached the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for asking these interesting questions. I know there were some questions about hormonal changes in boys. I apologize, but it's not within the scope of today's webinar, and that's a huge topic. But again, I hope you can apply the strategies I mentioned. As I said, children with autism are visual learners. So a child who is going through puberty or hormonal changes can be taught. Any child can be taught, honestly, and so can be taught about what is going to happen when they experience puberty through visuals, through social stories. But yeah, I can't go too much into it because it's not really related to the topic. So thank you so much for listening in and hope to see you soon next time.